So first of all, thank you for taking time to chat with me. Really enjoyed the film.
Thanks.
So I do want to nerd out a bit for a second. I think Villains is like one of the great horror comedies of the past decade.
Dude.
And I think with Novocaine, you balance the action and the comedy in a similarly effective way to what you do in Villains, which is the horror and the comedy. How do you guys kind of balance these different genres in your film so effectively?
You know, it's just something that we've always done pretty naturally. I think that's just the kinds of movies that we like. You know, we were looking at a lot of late 80s, early 90s action movies when we were getting ready for this. Things like, you know, Lethal Weapon or Midnight Run or Die Hard. And I think a lot of those movies are really, really funny. And yet you don't think of them as pure comedies. You know, there's real drama in those movies. The stakes are real. The characters are going through, you know, real trauma and plight. And so, you know, we were just trying to bring that vibe back a bit, because I think a lot of times with action movies nowadays, it's pushed one way or the other. It's either all just a joke and funny, or it's quite serious and like dour and badass, you know, and we love those movies too, but I think for us to get excited about something, it has to be a little funky and a little off, a little left to center. And so, you know, we've been wanting to do an action movie for the longest time, and the concept for Novocaine was just something that, you know, drew us, because we knew that the fight scenes would feel unique, you know, because it's not somebody who knows how to fight, and so you're just not used to seeing that as an audience member. Your protagonist getting their ass kicked for the first, you know, 90% of the movie or 90% of the fight, and then, you know, figuring out some crazy way to win in the last second. So yeah, that really drew us to it.
I think it's also a matter of making, which is with the comedy infusion, of making sure, like Bobby said, that there's always stakes, which is a product of making the world around the character feel real. Like in Novocaine, it feels like it's taking place in the real world, except Nate is obviously just sort of in conflict with that world. He's not a likely action hero, and so because of that, you get all these comedic moments. If you make the world itself all comedic, and there's all these like setup, punchline, sort of joke moments, that's when you sort of spiral into farce, and then there's not really stakes anymore, and then you'd lose the heart that we think is so important at the center of this film.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the film is obviously very inspired by classic action films. What do you think makes like an iconic action hero?
An iconic action hero, that's a good question. I think in our case, like Bobby said, the reason that we think this character is so special and memorable is how unlikely he is. The fact that he doesn't have the skills, he doesn't have the toolbox that other action heroes do, and yet he fights just as hard, if not harder, and he has to utilize what we think is a much more relatable characteristic, which is wit. You know, you don't have to go to the gym for, you know, every day for 10 years to cleverly puzzle together a situation and figure out a way to overcome an adversary, and that's what Nate's doing. And so there's just like almost every element of him is deeply relatable to an audience member, and we think that is what, you know, makes an action hero really memorable and not just some forgettable, you know, kung fu master or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's the key word, is relatability. You know, I think that there's something so human about John McClane and his struggle, you know, and like I think same thing with Riggs and Murtaugh and Lethal Weapon. Like you can kind of like, I think a lot of people have days where they feel like Riggs, days where they feel like Murtaugh. A lot of times you either, you know, die a Riggs or live long enough to see yourself become a Murtaugh and that kind of thing. And so, you know, and I think that goes against what you know, a lot of modern action movies, your protagonist has a secret past, or, you know, was an assassin, or was what, you know, whatever. And so, but when your protagonist has a secret past, you have to hide them from the audience, but you don't get to fully get to know them. In those other movies, you don't really do that. You understand who John McClane is. You understand who Riggs and Murtaugh are. You're meeting them in vulnerable moments or moments with their family. You know, you don't have to, pretend they're one thing because you're going to reveal at the 15-minute mark that they know karate. You know, and so it allows you to be so much closer to the protagonist, and that's something that you know, we think really works in this film.